Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. On behalf of the NGMA Mumbai, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and Avid Learning, welcome to tonight's discussion of women writers in the city. This is part of Avid's Multipolis Mumbai series. The series was started in 2012 that was revived last year, which aims to decode the past while looking to the future and finding novel ways of engaging, interacting with, and re-energizing the city we love. Under this umbrella, we continue to take a closer look and chart at the ways businesses, brands, philanthropic individuals, architects, technology as related to arts engagement, poetry, and now women writers have influenced the way our city has been shaped. Tonight's discussion will highlight plural women's voices from and on our city. What are their concerns, preoccupations, struggles, and triumphs? How does the city inspire, move, engage, and soothe its feminine occupants? This program is a continued collaboration of Avid with the NGMA, and I'd like to thank Mr. Shiv Prasad Kennett for this opportunity. I know Shruti from his team is here. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome our panel of experts to the stage. I'm going to announce your names and I request you come up. Filmmaker and writer Paramita Vora. Feminist blogger and poet Harnid Kaur. Director Gaia Smart Cities and ex-country head of Harlequin Books, Amrita Chaudhary. Food and travel writer and editor, Meher Mirza. And our moderator for the evening, author and columnist, Shobha Dev. For more information about our formidable ladies and panelists, please refer to the bio handouts that have been distributed. And again, remember, take out your phones, put them on silent and start using them. Get social, post, repost, tag. Our handle is @AvidLearning and hashtag is learning never stops. Thank you very much. Over to you, Shobha, and look forward to an exciting discussion.
Thank you, Asad. Good evening, friends, ladies, and the few wonderful gentlemen present tonight. I want to start by asking a question that really bothered me when I saw the context of this panel, that do women really write differently? Can a reader tell if there's a blind test and you show someone a manuscript, can most people say, yes, that's a woman writing? And do these categories, in fact, go against the whole feminist narrative? Do we want to be called women writers? So let me ask you, Paramita, do you like being called a woman writer?
I have no problem being called a woman writer. I am a woman, I'm a writer. I would like to be called a writer sometimes and a woman writer at other times. I think that it's impossible. I don't know if people can tell whether a man, woman, or trans person has written something, right? But I do think that as women, we all have particular sets of experiences. And those experiences do enter the way we write. And now I'm going to totally go out of syllabus and quickly say, because now I'm on the same stage, that I'm a big fangirl of yours, and it's because I do think that so many things that people don't consider to be important or in the canon of importance, like love, sex, intimacy, the difficulty of finding a place to rent if you're a woman, for example. These do not enter the stories of men. Yeah. That's a real shortcoming in the work of men. Yeah. So, of course, we should talk about writing by women, writing of women, writing about women, and also question at the same time, what is men's writing really? Actually, the fact is that women's writing stands out because we don't acknowledge that what is just called writing is men's writing.
Just to take that forward a little, V.S. Naipaul had snarkily mentioned that he can tell from the first line that it's a woman writing. It was a kind of a put down. And I'm glad to hear that you don't mind being described as a woman writer, but I wonder how a man would feel to be called a man writer. Do you have any views on this, Amrita?
It it depends on the genre that we're looking at, right? I mean, like, I write crime fiction. They are fast-paced, they're thrillers. Like, they tend to be set in the world of business, in the world of art. There is crime, there is grittiness. So there is a bit of that. But, like, there is a perspective, as Paro mentioned, like, there's a perspective of relationships, of love, like, that does creep into it. Yeah. So in that sense, like, I'm not sure if from the first sentence you'll make out, but definitely, like, through the story you'll make out, like, that there is a different angle to it, which is slightly different. Like, there's a little bit more layering of emotions, which doesn't come in male crime writers' stories, which would come in mine.
But you started off essentially heading a publishing company that produces romance books, Harlequin. And women and mush, they say, go together. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different point of view? Are women more emotional, or is that just one of those tropes that women are too emotional, say men? What is too emotional?
Well, there's emotion, but there is also, like, there is, women are evolving. So they want their place in their relationships. Like, they want to exhibit their individuality. And, one of the ways in which we saw romances evolve over the last, few years and the decades is that it's not just about relationship. It's usually, like, about the woman finding her independence. It's about the woman finding her friends, finding her place in life, and also finding relationships. So I think it's changing, it's evolving, it's mush, yes, like, but there is a lot more.
Now, two of our wonderful panelists write across platforms. Harneet, you do. And that experience, do you feel that the content that you put out there has a much wider reach, a much more exciting platform than what you might get through traditional, like publishing a book or writing a column? Or
social media democratizes. That's what it does. Suddenly, you have a host of voices which are equally loud. Some louder than others, yes, but they have the similar platform to start with. It also brings about so many perspectives. There are authors I know who wouldn't get publishing deals because the game is geared against them. They have platforms, and we are all honored to be able to actually access their works. There are works which aren't in English, which get translated because people connect over social media and say, oh, that should be in an accessible language. Social media is absolutely fabulous, and anyone who says otherwise is terrified of the status quo getting destroyed.
Do you think women on any platform are judged differently by critics, by readers? Is their work seen through a totally different lens, a different prism? Would the same book be looked at, read differently if as it happened in J.K. Rowling's case and other people who had to resort to subterfuge to get published or to be read? Have any of you experienced that yourselves, that there is a certain subtle or not so subtle discrimination involved?
I call Mr. Harneet very often because my name is not really feminine in many ways. But the thing is that women often have to bear the brunt of handling the inner lives of men and women. Men go ahead and do fancy things, and women are actually untangling so many of the emotional threads they are handed over. So when women write, they often integrate the process of that untangling in what they do, which is why people say women's writing comes off as emotional. Women are kicking ass while handling a man-child very often, so I don't see any problem with that, A. B, yes, of course, women are always judged harshly because the metrics have scaled ahead, right? A lot of women authors, when they start off, they're pitted against experienced authors that, oh, you're writing similar themes, you must be as good. We don't give them a leeway to make mistakes. All women deserve space to make mistakes, to learn. No author has a smooth trajectory upwards. It goes up and down. Women's mistakes just get highlighted very often because the entire status quo depends on women actually providing emotional labor for men to write. When women write, the tables turn.
Well, that's something to really think about. Meher, you are writing on food and travel. And food, I consider food extremely erotic. So, do you find the writing of it, when men write about food, very distinct and different than the way a woman enjoys food, writes about food, photographs food, travels on her stomach? I feel there's a huge distinction. I can certainly tell when a woman is enjoying her food. It's very apparent. It's not treated in a clinical way.
Yeah, no, so I think that's definitely true. Men tend to do a lot of more sort of clinical observational writing. Also in travel, I think, as well. Whereas women bring a much more, no, I'm not going to say emotional, but, and I don't want to give this a stereotypical bent, but they're a little bit more lush, at least the way that I write. That's a very personal thing for me, because that's how I see food, and I bring in culture, and I bring in anthropology, and I bring in all kinds of things in my writing which I don't necessarily see a man do in quite the same way. So yes, I agree. And also, like I was saying, for travel, I don't see a lot of famous women travel writers. If you think of the travel writing, there's a lot of men. You hear, Eric Newby and people like that. These are the names that get thrown around a lot. But who are the famous women travel writers who are writing travel books, I think all of these things do tie into this.
Paul Theroux, we are still waiting for the female Paul Theroux.
Yes.
It could well be because the women have more mobility.
No, it is very true.
Men have far more mobility.
It is very true.
And they probably feel safer. Have you ever encountered feelings of anxiety during your travels as a woman, since we are specifically
Of course.
And how have you dealt with it? Did you give them one back?
I tend to carry my umbrella with me, so it gets used. But honestly, even just walking on the road sometimes, trying to get to a restaurant somewhere to write a story, I think women have maps in their head to navigate what part of the city is safe and what to dress and all of that. And all that comes into play even for me as an extraordinarily privileged writer who just writes about food, And there's how do I deal with it depends on how I'm feeling at the time. Sometimes I ignore, sometimes I slap, sometimes I scream, sometimes I think I'm foreign. So then I speak to them in Hindi and they're like, oh, no, madam, theek hai,
How many times have you used the umbrella to good use? I mean, really put it to good use?
Oh my, let me think of the last time. It was maybe 2 weeks ago when I was outside and I was walking down Haji Ali and I saw a man get up as soon as I reached. So I just wailed a little and he was like, Kya ho raha hai, madam? Why? I'm not a bad person. Why are you moving away from me? I was like, what? He's so ridiculous. And then he just kept following me. So I brandished my umbrella and said, Kya chahiye aapko? And then he nahi, madam, theek hai,
So this has turned out to be a bonus. We've even got tips on how to handle pests who come too close to you. Now, the good tip is all of us should carry umbrellas, whether it's raining or not. So, Paramita, I wanted to ask you that do you feel, since we're talking about women writing about Mumbai, the Mumbai experience as it were, do women react differently to cities from men? How do we even know? It's such a subjective thing, isn't it?
Well, I think it's 2 or 3 things, and to slightly circle back to the earlier discussion about is women's writing seen differently. I mean, I think the one thing is that the way that women's writing or women's filmmaking or women's anything is written about, reviewed, discussed is so damn boring, right? It's like in one Khadi Bhandar department. Okay, now we will write about, every writer who writes about what women are doing suddenly gets this very high-minded tone. Nobody wants to read the damn thing, and it's never really looked at as art, right? Whereas when men do something, it's all very eroticized and revolutionary and powerful and hot and happening somehow, right? So I'm just trying to popularize the hashtag bore mat kar yaar when it comes to that stuff. So yeah. But I do, for example, I've made a film about toilets called Q2P, and I do think you have to be a woman trying to have a different life in the city, not a life where you just like are in a posh office in a nice house and you always have a toilet, but working as a documentary filmmaker or somebody who's a journalist, anybody who wants to be out and about in the city is going to see very quickly the city was not built for you to be out and about in. So one thing is you won't easily find a place to pee, and you'll probably endanger your health or inhibit your movements because of that. So I do think that making a film like U2P more than 10 years ago opens up a way of thinking about the city which people were not doing, because they're not looking at it from that point of view. Everything's about the global city and how we'll have these buildings and these nice places to go to in Parel and whatever. But excuse me, we will still not have a place to go to the loo if we're out on the street, right? And similarly, I think I began to live alone when I was 22. And for me, it was a completely different experience. It meant having to live next door to women who were bar dancers and people who drove auto rickshaws. And I think it's the best thing that happened to me was I came out of my class comfort zone, and it taught me to be a real person. And it showed me that there is a lot that happens in the city, and there are many types of women. There's not only one type of woman living in the city and experiencing the city, right? So I think that, yes, women live in the city differently. Bombay is a city which allows women to have a different kind of life if they so choose. And then when we start writing about these things, it's not only in terms of trials and tribulations or triumphs. Actually, it's a question of experiences and how our experience shaped the city. I mean, I made a film called West Stand Up, which is about Catholic women. And if we think about Christian women going out and being secretaries and nurses, and think that today we're all out and about, living lives that we couldn't have lived 100 years ago, then we owe it to those women of this city living that life, fashionable, glamorous, hardworking, that makes Bombay a safer city for women than many others, I guess.
And to go back to you, the Agents of Ishq, what was the response to that? And if you could just share quickly with the audience what Agents of Ishq actually is.
So Agents of Ishq is a website that I founded, which is about sex, love, and desire. And it was made in response to all the kind of stuff that people were saying, like, oh my God, there's so much sexual violence. You know, you talk about women and sex, or you talk about sex at all, and it's always about violence and why women should not be outside the home. And it's always about women's safety and never about women's freedom, right? And women, the possibility of women to have lives of intimate choice as they would like. So I thought, like, okay, if we leave it to the secular boys whom everybody likes to give lollipops to, ke dekho kitne achhe ladke hain, they made a film about sex ed, we're going to be stuck with a lot of boring stuff. So we'll do it. We'll make Agents of Ishq, and it will be a place which is friendly, pleasurable, but most of all, desi. Because I also think, like, all the stuff that we have about sex, if it's not about violence and if it's not about disease, then it's all about American slang and how we have these, like, you know, the thing I discovered that people said vajayjay. Do you call your vagina vajayjay? And I'm like, no, boss, does that make me unliberated? So the thing is that to have an Indian conversation about sex and love located in Indian life is what Agents of Ishq is about. People share stories of their intimate life. We make videos and podcasts, and as I was just telling Amrita before and other people sometimes, that we don't get trolled because I think people are fully ready to hear stories of women's experiences, and women want that conversation to be there, which is about, look, what an awesome life I'm leading and what kind of choices I'm making. So yes, please go and check it out.
Yeah, but that's really, really most encouraging to hear that when you say you feel women in the city are fully ready and accepting. The more important point is, are men fully ready for these fully ready women?
No, men are not. I mean, to give you a quick statistical thing, the major contributors and participants in the site are women and queer people and trans people, and straight men are terrorized. I think they do want to talk about things, right? But it is so difficult for them to find a language, and we are constantly trying to engage them in conversation. But it's true. Women are moving far ahead, they're having awesome experiences, and men are very paralyzed and really need to find a new language and a new way of being. Otherwise, they're going to be not at the best party in the world.
But we do care. We want them at the party, right?
If you're heterosexual, you want them, right? What to do?
So, Harneet, I want to ask you about the ease of forgetting. If you could just share with the audience what ease of forgetting was about. And also, if I can at some point persuade you to share a poem with everybody.
Okay.
That would be great.
I think as you grow up, you're always taught to save things, salvage them, and keep them around. You know, if something breaks, you fix it. You just don't drop it. If something doesn't fit you, you take it to the alteration tailor. You don't say ki nahi chahiye. I kind of grew with that mentality, and it percolated down to the relationships I had, both platonic and romantic. And I realized that I don't know how to let go. I'm going to keep trying to salvage broken things, and they hurt me in return, because if something breaks and you pick it up, it's going to cut you. As simple as that. I wrote The Ease of Forgetting almost as an instruction manual to myself on how to forget, how it is okay to forget, most importantly. I think we often teach our women to keep trying to save something, you know, even when it's unsalvageable. Women especially are given the jurisdiction towards just make that happen. I don't want to make it happen anymore. I'm good with letting go. So that's how The Ease of Forgetting came to being. My mom's there, and she's my editor for everything, which basically means she makes a lot of fun of whatever I write. And she's like, hey, not good, not good. But yes, I think a lot of what I learned while writing that book also came from working with my mom, because we realized how differently we see the idea of letting go. And that informed further work. I realized I most exclusively want to write for young women. I want to talk to young women because they're the greatest natural resource we have. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Now, when we're talking about letting go, Amrita, when you were editing and commissioning books of the romance variety, what do you think was the big significant shift in the way Indian readers responded to those early Harlequin novels from the ones that we, as me, 100 years ago, of course, grew up reading, which were all very sanitized and safe, and about the only thing that was, they were not bodice rippers. I mean, the kiss was about as far, and that always happened on the last page, so I'd always start with the last page, of course, to see them. But that changed with you, didn't it?
It changed significantly.
People had sex in the new.
Absolutely, like, and it goes from pink to red hot to black hot, right? So yes, it is about sexuality as well, and it's also like, it's cloaked differently. So the way the books, like, in India are written, they tend to have a lot more of parallel story tracks. They'll have friends, they'll have family, which would never happen in in a similar book which comes out in the UK or in the US, because it's all about two individuals and it's about their stories. In India, our stories, even if it's letting go, you're letting go not just the person, but you're letting go the person's friend and their aunt and their uncle and everything else, right? So that notion of we, that collective, comes into the stories. But yes, there is no, the boundaries were broken a long time back. You just cloak it differently. You just have to make sure that the cover is safe and inside it.
And now that you're writing crime thrillers yourself, what are your boundaries while writing?
So for me, as an author, there's a lot that happens in crime, right? It's about trying to decode the story and writing it alongside. So it's about experiencing different things. It's about trying to say the gritty parts of Mumbai, which I don't really see in my day-to-day life. How do I even imagine them? How do I experience part of it? How do I see where are the places, spaces where crime happens? So it's putting myself out there, partly in imagination, but partly also trying to see and what's interesting is that my first book was largely centered on south, in the southern part of the city. But as work has taken me to the north, my stories also have shifted to the north. And if you see Mumbai today, 70% of Mumbai and most of the young people actually live north of Bandra, right? So the city itself has changed, the city has evolved, the city, the vocabulary of people has changed, the places where they hang out, the places where action happens has changed a lot. So that, all of that then reflects into the city and into the books as well.
Are you watching the current obsession? You know which one? Netflix?
Sacred Games?
Yes, and
I have not. I did read the book, but I have not watched it.
addiction. It's dangerous. I mean, I just can't wait to go back to what I've missed and keep revisiting it, but that's a really brilliantly structured, absolutely brilliantly structured, brilliantly acted out. It's fantastic. So Meher, tell us the worst thing that could have happened, has happened to you as a travel food writer. I mean, any UGG experience, food-wise, taste-wise, men-wise, experience-wise, in Mumbai. Or do you
In
think Mumbai
Mumbai?
is far more accepting than in all your other travels? Mumbai has been kinder in many ways to you, or not?
I can't say that I've traveled all that much for work as such, but yeah, I think Mumbai has definitely been far more accepting than any other place, perhaps because I'm just more familiar with it. You know, spatially, I know what's what, I know what to do, where to go, that kind of thing. But most UGG experience, it has got to be dealing with men, I think. I think that's mostly how it always is. Kolaba, going someplace, men follow me all the way down Causeway, baby, something. I mean, I'm like, no, I'm like, please. That kind of thing happens so often. Like
With the
really,
baby?
Yeah.
Oh.
And being followed. I was with a friend who's white. They assumed both of us were white. So we walked all the way down Causeway, and I kept talking to them in Hindi, and they kept talking to me in English, and they kept saying, come to the restaurant with us. And I kept saying, nahi jana hai, please. And they just kept on, and finally we walked towards the police station on Kolaba, and I said, chale. Then they walked off. I mean, it's not particularly overly UGG, but there was, I do now remember the most UGG thing. I don't know whether it's a good thing to reveal here, but why not? Yeah. No, I mean, it was kind of disgusting because I was much younger and I was molested quite badly on a train once, on the local train. So that was pretty horrible. But since then, I've learned how to deal with things. So that was probably the most UGG thing that I've undergone.
So yes, can we call Mumbai a tough learning experience of how to manage your life as a woman? Paramita, you have had a lot of... you've lived on your own, you've chosen to live on your own, and with company that you said wasn't exactly the company you'd grown up with.
Sure, yeah.
So what was that big learning for you?
So I think, for example, I spent my college and high school years in Delhi. So obviously, I found Bombay much freer. And I think that Bombay is a possible learning experience. All learning experiences are tough. Honestly, sometimes I think that the things that happen to us in our 20s are rites of adulthood also, that there are difficult experiences of becoming a grown-up. And, like one of my most difficult experiences was I moved into this tenement housing, which, yes, it was 700 rupees a month. So I was like, great, I can do the work that I want to do. And I can also live on my own. I don't have to answer to anybody. And so it's in tenement housing, and that is cool. And I moved and I put all my boxes, cardboard boxes, of course, I had no suitcases. And I went away. I came back 2 days later, and there was like a hole from the top to the bottom of all my cardboard boxes, basically through my clothes, my books, my utensils, whatever. And I'm like, what can this be? What can it be? And it took me a week to discover it was bandicoots, right? So now, maybe this doesn't seem to be a difficult experience, but for a 22-year-old, it was like, what is happening to me? I can't cope with this. And living alone is not glamorous at all, right? But it's okay, because I think if I hadn't done those things, I wouldn't be doing the things that I do now. And I wouldn't really be able to think like, when younger women work with me or are around me and they're like, I want to stay on my own, but my parents don't let me. My thing is just do it. Rebel. Your parents will never let you do it. So the only way is rebellion, suffering, and then everything will be okay, right? So I think Bombay allows that. There's possibility. I think that living next door to people who are completely different from me forced me to define myself outside of my class, my caste, my whatever, right? I just had to be me. And I had to learn how to communicate with Rukhsar or Mona, whoever was living next door to me, and also learn to see other people as people in a way the other cities don't let you do. And I think that gender class, caste, all those things are intertwined. And we can't really grow with gender if you're not also growing in those other directions, right? So yeah, I mean, the fact that also, now Bombay has changed, but that my friends were trade union leaders, and one of my friends was a textile mill worker, I don't think this could happen in any other city. And I think, therefore, it's sometimes challenging and difficult, but it's just more possible here to meet those challenging experiences and go past them and become something awesome.
Now, Hanid, I wanted to ask you, if your mother was not your editor and, in-house censor board, if you were to live on your own, how dramatically would it affect what you say in the public domain?
I think I wouldn't be saying much because I don't have time to say much. Like just handling living alone. I always say I can do what I can because I come home and things are done.
Anapina is taken care of.
Like there's hot food, there's laundry done, and there's someone to tell you, oh, it's okay, it was a bad day, it's fine. But anyway, I think the space you exist in informs your writing. For example, I'll give you a slightly broader example between Bombay and Delhi. I live practically between the cities, and when you write in Delhi, you space out your emotions because there's so much space around you. You tend to write more expansively. You tend to write with more leisure, I'd say, because Delhi as a city moves a little slower. When you write in Bombay, your writing is tighter, it's frenetic, it's layered, layer upon layer, because the kind of space you're existing in changes dramatically. That is what I think would have changed, because now I'm allowed space to exist. When you live alone, you don't have that buffer of space around you. You are directly in contact with social, emotional, mental elements. Physical, it's a different thing. But just the fact that there is no buffer between you and reality informs your writing a lot. Like when I lived in Delhi in a PG without my parents, I wrote differently. Now when I live with them, I write differently. I'm lucky to not be censored per se, except when I'm told to remove the bad words. That's fair. You write what you experience, and what you experience without buffers is massively different from what you do when you're sitting at home.
So as a crime writer, how careful are you about the use of language, and how important a role does the city of Mumbai play in shaping your book? Is it a character in your book? Is it a criminal, or is it a cop, Mumbai, in your books?
So the city definitely is a character, but when I say crime, right, crime has many shades. My first book was about art crime, which is extremely white collar. It's it's in the world of salons and champagne, and that's where art crime happens. It was about forgery. It was it's a very high end crime. So the scene and the setting for it was very different, right? The scene and the setting for it was all posh locations across Mumbai and Alibag and Delhi, and of course you did.
I loved it. Yeah.
And you go across a little bit to San Francisco and to DC and so on, right? So the setting is really different. My second book was on cybercrime. Now, that has a very specific language, right? Because it's about technology, it's about hacking, it's about, and it's very important because we live so much of our lives today on social media. At least, we have been. I can see the kids, changing a little, the teenagers today, the 12 to 14-year-olds are engaging with social media differently than what we did about, 10 years back. But we live a lot. Right, it's about projection, it's about being out there, and what are the things that can hurt us, can harm us in many ways. We don't think about it. So for that, it was really the idea was to. There are things that I know, things that I have seen, but it was also meeting with hackers. It was meeting with people who are solving cybercrime. It was meeting with people in the police. It was meeting with people who are doing storytelling. MTV used to have this really a lovely episode on cybercrime before. It was meeting that team, trying to understand. So it's about capturing those stories because it's a new space. We don't think about the dangers that lurk out there, right? So the language actually had to reside in that space. It had to reside in our real life, the physical life, but it also had to reside in our digital life. And it had to have the kind of vocabulary that was required to convey what was happening.
Now, common question to you, and you can answer it in whichever order you wish, but would any other city of India in particular, India specifically, have allowed you to be the woman you are today, the writer you are today? Is it Mumbai that we are all here to pay a tribute to for letting us be? And if so, what was that special something about Mumbai that made you have the courage to say what you're saying?
You should go first. You have mine.
I think unlike many cities in India, the city lets you be, right? And I've lived in cities around the world, and I've grown up in North India. And I know the constraints that North India puts on you, right? The constraints that, even today when I go back and if I meet my father's friends, and there's a certain expectation of behaving in a particular way, saying, having a certain kind of vocabulary, having a certain kind of body language, right? Which Mumbai actually frees you from. And large parts of Mumbai actually, frankly, do not belong in India. They belong somewhere floating with the rest of the world. So it allows you to be differently. It allows you to experience life with a little bit more freedom than a Delhi would or a Banaras would or Agra would. Right now we're doing a lot of work from the smart cities perspective in Agra, and the kinds of things that happen in a city like that are very different, right? How you behave.
Meher, what do you think?
Yes, definitely Mumbai has shaped me absolutely the way I am. I haven't lived anywhere in India other than in Mumbai, but I have lived in London, and after Mumbai, even the grotty southeast end where there are gangsters being shot and mobs and things, I was completely comfortable because I was made in Mumbai, and it was okay, someone shot, it was just, it didn't matter to me so much. Mumbai has absolutely given me my voice, and because I come from the community that I come from, there is a sort of recognition for the Parsis as well, but also I can have my own individual voice among, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I can be heard in this city, which I am very grateful for. I have a voice, and people are listening. Avid reads my things. I'm so grateful.
But not so surprisingly perhaps, but there's a namesake of yours, Meher Moose.
Yes.
Who a lot of us will remember was a great traveler. And she wrote about food and travel almost 45 years ago. And she went all the way from the North Pole to Africa and ate all manner of rather unappetizing dishes. And so I would say she was a pioneer in many ways, and she did break new ground.
Yes.
So we must give her that respect and recognition.
Absolutely. I've heard so much about her, and I think maybe met her once.
Yeah, she's...
But
yes,
I've heard lots about her.
She's quite special, actually. Very
she
special.
is.
Yeah, she is very special. So, Harneet, the city, the family.
Cities are languages, all of them. All of them have a particular syntax to how they move. If you stand on the curb of a city, any point in the city, it speaks a different dialect. And the number of dialects that Bombay can speak is astonishing because there are so many layers to it. I keep harking back to Delhi because that's my closest point of comparison. Most of Delhi speaks a certain inaccessible language, especially for a woman, because you are not involved in the thrum of the city. You are an outsider to it. Bombay involves you. Every part of it involves you. Standing on the curb, Cafe Ideal, if you stand there during sunset, you hear a different language. You hear a different language in Parel. You hear a different language in Andheri. So when you write in Bombay, very specifically, you can bring in various words from these languages. And each time you write about the same place, it reads differently because you're using different tones and tenors. So does Bombay inform my writing? Absolutely. I don't think I would be as inspired to continuously write if I wasn't living in a place where I can look out of the window and find something to write about. Bombay gives you that. It might rip your not just heart out, like your bank balance and your spine and your sleep pattern, everything to shreds, but it does give you back inspiration, and that's pretty priceless.
And will you now share a poem with us, now that you're on a bit of a roll?
After Paro.
After, okay. ठीक है? But I'm going to hold you to it. Huh? So get that poem ready.
So I guess I'll be the slightly odd one out. I mean, I think that all cities make us, and I've lived in many cities, and they've all made me something of what I am. But I always have felt that like Bombay was a kind of home for the person that I was. And I think that's a matter of coincidence whether I decided to stay on here. I mean, my mother and my grandparents were from Bombay, so it was a kind of home already in a way. But as an adult, when I came here on my own, maybe I decided to stay here because I felt it gave me a voice that other places couldn't. I don't know. I think that different parts of India, one of the greatest things about Indian culture for me is that we have a lot of emphasis on pleasure in many, many ways. It may be outside, it may be inside, but we are a culture that adores sensuality, you know, smells and tastes and food and all of that. And I think Bombay is definitely interestingly different because there's a comradeship you can have here that you can't easily have in other cities. And so the romance of the city, at least for me, that feeling that you'll turn a corner and something might happen, that is a bit more for women in Bombay than in many other places, because yes, we can be in many other places. We can be out of place more easily, right? And I guess I feel a little bit that that's changing slightly in Bombay, because Bombay has become so much more stratified class-wise that you're less likely to go to a place that you're not supposed to be in. And then I start to wonder, like, what's that going to be? Because it's only by being in the place you were not supposed to go to that you sometimes find out who you are, right? And I think that Bombay gives that to us in plenty if we let it.
Yeah. Lovely. That's such a lovely way of putting it. Also, when you said you hear so many different voices at every street corner, it's a different language you're listening to. So I think you're ready to share a poem. I know it.
Okay.
Go for it.
This is actually kind of an ode to the busyness of Bombay and how it's okay to step back from it, because I started work some time ago and adulthood hit me. So it can wait, all of it. There is nothing you can do with this breath that you cannot do with your next. There is no miracle to this moment. The one after will just be as capable of being canvas to your magic. There is no glory to this blink. The world will hold still for you to close your eyes for once. This is a reminder of the insignificance of this particular hour. There will be significant ones, yes, but this one, you're allowed to release your clutch on. You're a slave to the memory of inability. Call it rest for once. Pick up a dictionary and scribble out words that were fed to you as rewards. Read it again. Do you see how many have tattooed themselves like curses under your skin? All these promises you carry draped all over your shoulders. You're allowed to take them off sometimes. Just long enough to get feeling back into your numb back. Long enough to remember that you're not a beast of burden. You're just a beast, warm and soft, and allowed to curl up and rest when your body asks you to. It is okay to say yes. It will wait, all of it. Sit.
Thank you so much. Such a special moment for all of us. Wonderful. Just lovely. Okay, so here's a trick question. It is believed that women writers have to deal with their work and their selves being sexualized in ways that can be brutal or excessive or ridiculous? Have you faced that yourselves? Amrita?
See, as an author, like, you know, you're trying to unconstrain yourself, right? And that's what you do in the pages. And part of that letting go of, like, you know, part of it is letting go. Part of it is, like, you know, stepping into areas where you might not feel comfortable, like, you know, like might not have felt comfortable. But that said, like, you know, as an author, I have been through my journey. As an editor, I have seen many other young authors, like, you know, go through that journey. And it's significantly changing. I'm, like, you know, pleasantly surprised by the kinds of like directions in which authors today will take their writing, and be very happy, you know, to take it in those directions. So I personally don't think that you know, anybody I think there are lenses through which, like, you know, a critic or a marketer or an author would view different works, and those lenses are perhaps, like, you know, like still set in very traditional ways of approaching, like, you know, books and like, you know, writing and relationships, and especially, like, you know, if you're looking at sex in books, like, you know, like looking at that. So certainly there is a perspective that comes into play, but I think it is changing, and there are enough writers who are changing it.
Paramita, is that your experience, that it's changing rapidly and women don't have to deal with that as much?
No, I don't know. Maybe a little bit, but I was thinking it's a trick question, so I was trying to find the trick in the question. And I think
most people are uncomfortable discussing it.
No, but I think,
or
you know,
will talk around it.
I guess I'm not one of them. Poor Asad is looking very worried. Paramita should not talk more about sex, but at the NGMA. But, you know, I made it my goal to talk in these places about this. I think the question is there something wrong with being sexualized? And the answer might be that we'd all like to be sexualized on our own terms, not somebody else's, right? I mean, think of me, I'm not a hot chick, so I always wished to be a hot chick because I thought people will take me more seriously if I'm a hot chick. They will, right? If you're a hot chick at a film festival, more people will take an interest in you than if you've made a film which is a hot chick in itself, right? So for me, it's always been that thing that, like, reading my stuff is a bit of a blind date because a lot of people are in love with what I write because it's very alluring. I have developed a style that's extremely sensual and alluring. And for me, it's not driven by the need to be a hot chick, but because I love Hindi film songs and they've always been a kind of writing inspiration for me, and I want to write like that. So I'm sure that people feel a bit disappointed when they meet me because they're like, shit, man, when I read your stuff, I was like, which is that sad for them. But the thing is, there are so many terms, in other words, on which we wish to be seen. And I don't think that glamour and sexiness and beauty are bad things if we are getting to decide how they are. And we all want to be beautiful and sexy. I certainly do. So I think it's okay. But it's kind of boring when, you know, like Arundhati Rao read a whole book and we'd all only remember that some chap talked about her collarbones. So and also that maybe being very beautiful will sometimes protect you from criticism that could have made you a better writer. So it's a flip side, right? That as beautiful plus awesome. You know, and your beauty can be in your awesomeness of different kinds. So I'm just saying that because in response a bit to what Amrita is saying, there's only one type of idea of sexualizing or allure or beauty that the market understands and continues to understand. And I think that it's up to the women who are writing and making art to kick some ass in that direction and say, like, actually, guys, thoda baju hato, we have different definitions, you know, and we're going to put those definitions out and be beautiful in different ways. Yeah.
For example, there's this wonderful quote from Martha Nussbaum. I can't pronounce her second name very well. Monarchy of Fear is what she's just written, and there's a very perceptive interview done by her, the last page of Time magazine. Monarchy of Fear is in itself a very powerful title. And she's been asked this question again about how women are perceived and whether she plays up to any of those ideals of how she should be projected. And I think she's been very truthful, and so have a lot of women writers who've been put into these boxes, which I think most men who write or who paint or who are movie makers are not necessarily subjected to the same kind of scrutiny. So the question was about that, whether you're comfortable with the scrutiny.
Moving away a little from sexualization, I'd like to bring in the idea of sensual ability. When you're a feminist writer, especially, male readers and critics try to weaponize the idea of sensuality against you. They desensualize you. They say, oh, ye feminist type ki hai. What do you know about beauty and pleasure and love and longing? Because all you talk about is auraton wali baatein. You know, that ladies log ki baatein. So, which I'm very proud of. But I think, coming back to what you said, I think it's also about reclaiming how we want these definitions to exist around us. What defines sensuality other than a perceived submission to the idea of a masculine definition of sensuality? If I want a feminist definition of sensuality, I get to write it. So when a male critic especially tells me, oh, you write too much about women, I'm like, haan to? Like, that's what I do. That's my gig. So that's the thing. Men tend to weaponize what are considered feminine virtues against women who try to change the way those are exhibited. And that's something that a lot of women authors face. And I'm so happy that a sisterhood exists. Women authors will interact with women authors on Instagram. You have a cabal of women writers pumping each other up, sharing each other's works, and it is delightful because that's a space where you can define your sensuality. You can define how you want to be perceived as a sexual, sensual being. And you know what? When you said, do we want men to come with us? It's optional. Like, I have my girls at school. So,
Meher, have you found the writing of food, the way people respond to it, very different as a woman? And is it an experience that is specifically sensual or not?
Well, I don't think that is for me per se specifically sensual. Perhaps in the language that I use, but not in the subject matter so much. And I don't think that people engage with my writing in quite that way. Maybe because it's not really to do with gender at all. Very much more to do with society and, just eating, the pleasure of eating food, any kinds of food. But I don't think that it's looked at through that lens, just my brand of writing. Also, I'm lucky to be in a space where lots of women are already there, and so there's a lot of support as well. So even online, even just like she was saying on Instagram, Facebook, places like that, women support each other. So in that way, yes, it's gendered, but not my work so much. I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. Do you think women express outrage and anger very differently online or through their work? Amrita? Do we vent in a way that it's easy to tell, oh, there goes another woman hyperventilating?
So we do vent about certain things, right? And it's stereotypically, like, there are certain things that we vent about, right? Like, we vent about, like the challenges of life, also how we are perceived. I think, like, your earlier question of how we are perceived by society is also something that women, like, tend to vent a lot about. They tend to vent a lot about the constraints that are put on them sometimes and whether or not they're able to break through them. So there is a set of things that women do typically tend to vent about, and women authors in particular would also touch upon those topics.
Is there a kind of a feminist commonality in any of this, or it's just an individual kind of response to one's work? I think, yeah.
To answer your question, I think you need to you need to hark back to the construct of anger. Masculine anger is externalized. Feminine anger is internalized. Women will vent, but in small amounts, and keep holding a lot of things in. I think the last year and a half or so, especially with the Me Too movement coming out and, solidarity building up, women are pissed off. And it's showing finally, after years of it being reduced to just women talking to women, the anger is finally finding legitimacy in expression. So now when you say she's an angry feminist type, what you're saying is she is showing anger like I don't expect women to show. Women are actively pissed off, and it's actively a good thing. So,
you know, just to provide a small counterpoint to what Martha says, because she was asked the same thing, about is there a fresh awareness, are people responding differently after the Me Too and so on. And the way she put it is that merely venting and saying I'm pissed off, I'm angry, serves no purpose whatsoever, unless it's leading to some kind of change within ourselves. So is that something we need to think about? She said it's not about getting even at all. It's about suggesting a way forward in a constructive way that makes it all a little more palatable. It's not just about saying, I'm angry.
So my day job is that of a policy analyst. I work in the dev sector, and we work on fairly hairy issues that people don't interact with. I'd use the same framework to this, that to begin any kind of campaign or movement that addresses a structural problem, you have to start a conversation. You have to get people to care about it. This was the mobilization moment. Now we consolidate that, we create more abilities that impact the world around us. So give it time. You know, again, when you talk about Me Too, you're talking about years and years and years of iniquity. So to say कि एक साल में बढ़ास निकाल दो, उसके बाद काम पे चलो, is very silly, because give us time. This is our stage. We get to keep it for as long as we want. And if it's, everybody works at a different pace. I might have finished off my anger and started working on trying to make something constructive out of it. Somebody else hasn't. There is no linearity to how women react to these things, and they should be allowed that space.
I think Meher wants to add to that.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to see the context in which she's speaking. She comes from a Western perspective. We come from India, where things are not quite in the same place. Maybe women just don't have the same freedoms that they do over there. So what she might find as maybe not so progressive or, you know, counterproductive is not quite so for us over here. I mean, I think here just articulating our rage is such a huge step for us.
Do you think Bombay, Mumbai encourages women to express themselves far more freely than other cities of India?
I mean, I just wanted to go back to the question before answering this, which is to say that when women do anything, it's always considered extra, right? Anything with women it's a surplus. Like looking for a women's toilet in Dadar, near Dadar station, I couldn't find one. And the man, I asked, why isn't there a ladies' loo when there's a gents' loo? He said, because औरतों को जगह ज़्यादा लगती है. So that, I think, in a nutshell, is everything. Women, it's extra. It's not part of the program, right? So when women are angry, it's a problem. Whereas men have made entire careers out of being angry. So उनका तो advancement होता नहीं. They're angry when they're born. They're angry till they die. And we're like, boy, he's such an amazing revolutionary. I love his beard, you know. So I feel I get extremely bored by all that. So first of all, I feel like women's anger is not a surplus. It's there like anybody else's anger. That said, I do agree. Like for me as an artist, I do think that anger is a beginning point, but it cannot be my ending point. So I usually do, I mean, humor is a very big part of what I like to do, and it does emerge. It starts from a place of anger, but it transforms into something else. And I do think that there's a lot of reward for being stuck in an angry place, which the media pushes, right? You get rewarded for being outraged, and you have to be very vigilant to not be caught in that and let your anger be a productive, politically meaningful thing and not just become part of the machinery of polarity that is being created right now. Bombay does. I mean, have you been in a local train? It's very terrorizing. Like, that is women's anger, right? Like, if you run afoul of anybody who's traveling with like a big basket of fish or sabzi or whatever, and you get shouted at, you know that, you know, women's anger comes at all kinds of registers, and it's kind of inspiring, that degree of that fecundity of abuse. And you're like, I should learn that. I should learn to be like that. I think it does. I mean, when women speak, it is taken a little bit more seriously in different spaces in Bombay. So I think it does help us to do that.
And finally, a last question. Do you think feminism itself is a loaded word?
I mean, it's a fantastic word. It's loaded with all kinds of like possibility, and it's loaded with history. It's loaded with the fact that today, here we are. all doing the things we love to do, wearing the clothes we like to wear, taking taxis across the city, talking to a room full of women. That did not happen without feminism, unfortunately. For whoever who thinks it did, little bit history reading is very important. You know?
If feminism is a loaded word, use it as a rock and throw it at people. That is what I believe very firmly. You know what? Like when people say, oh, it's the F word, oh, you know, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equality, which first of all makes me laugh. Second of all, the thing is that, again, you're taught to minimize. You're taught to be unoffensive. You're taught to say, oh, but we need the men too. We need the non-feminists too. We have to gherao everybody. You know what? That's well and good, but sometimes you have to take a stand. And I think a lot of women are finally taking stands, and that's fabulous because at some point you get tired of accommodating. I want women to take space. I want them to stand and be able to say, this is my space, you don't come here. It's mine. And feminism is that pedestal, and I hope more women get to stand on it. That's what I want to work towards. Every woman deserves a space there.
Oh my, yes, I am a proud feminist. I've always been, and I don't understand why women wouldn't be feminist. It's made them who they are. We are here because of them. Why would you actively collude with a patriarchy that's looking to bring you down? I don't understand equalism. Nobody says, why do you call it Marxism? No, it's about something specific, hence feminism. Ridiculous.
No, Amrita, do you think more men should also define themselves as feminists so that it's just a different social world?
I'll give you an example from the business world, because I see more men becoming aware of feminism and equality and inequities that exist in the workplace, at least when their daughters come into the workforce, not when their wives. Okay, and I've seen this in instance after instance, right? And this is, it's an evolving word. I think we're fighting it around the world, actually. I have friends who are sitting in California. Look at the conversations over there about women in tech. Look about the conversation about women in venture capital. Look about the conversation about women in finance. Right? So the nuances might be different, but there is an element to it. So what happens in, let's say, equality in Africa means different, or feminism in Africa has a different slant to it than feminism in India, than feminism in the US. But at the core of it, there is so much of similarity, because despite the history, the needle shifts and goes back and shifts and goes back. So with each generation and with each set of new issues, and with each set of the Me Too movements, there is progress, and then it stalls, and then then it needs to be revived again. The question is how can you move? How can you make it faster? Can you make it different? Can we not start at ground zero every 5 years or every 3 years?
Thank you very much. Great, great, superb panel. A big round of applause for each and every one. And I think it's also the appropriate time to thank Mumbai, because without Mumbai, maybe we wouldn't all be sitting here. We wouldn't have such an incredible audience listening to us and applauding all the panelists when they made very, very relevant and wonderful and thought-provoking points. We're very happy to take questions. I think we have about 15 minutes to take questions. So if someone can just help with mic, so if you could just stand up, identify yourself, and keep the question short and specific, please. Who you're asking the question to would help.
Pushpa Bajula, my question is to anybody who would like to take up this question. My question is, do you think there is a choreography happening in the background where earlier issues are given to you to discuss? And is it that humanity is being pitted against each other as a design? For earlier there was patriarchal and the male domination, and now the women are made to stand up, but ultimately there's going to be a backlash, and there is a backlash happening, And it could also go towards the Taliban situation where women will ultimately be stoned because the financial pressure, there are different currents working. So is there somebody choreographing the issues that are being pushed in front of society today?
A choreographer, a global choreographer is a bit difficult to visualize. I think what's happening is pretty organic, and what is happening is overdue, and we have to deal with it as it happens in the right manner.
I think if I were to add urbanization is possibly like in a global choreography for you, the way like populations are shifting across geographies, and that's bringing in different cultures and different belief systems into clashes, is perhaps what's changing some of the dynamics today.
And possibly many more women in the workplace, which has completely changed how the world. Yeah. Oh, okay. We are the choreographers. She says, I agree. Each one of us is a choreographer in that sense. We write our own dance and we write our own music. There's a question on the front row here.
I'm a psychologist and I have my blog wherein I cater to these issues which involve sexuality and women not ready to participate and open about their sexuality and intimate issues. So when I open up even to say a topic like menstruation or something like that, so I have lots of men leaders, in my contacts. So they tend to kind of start picturizing you, they kind of start judging you because they know me at a personal level. So when they come next for their counseling session, they tend to have a very different body language, a very different way of talking, considering that okay, this lady is open about stuff, she's open about sexuality, so we can talk any rubbish with her, we can just, there are no boundaries, there are no ends. So I would want you all to answer me as to how do you all handle this?
First you go. Okay. Sex expert. What is wrong with somebody talking to you about sex? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So I think that there is a way in which we have developed a kind of odd morality where we say we will talk about sex, but oh my God, did this person talk to me about sex and this is how he is thinking of it. It may be that the way you think about sex and the person talking to you about sex is very different and that his gaze is demeaning. But you are not defined by somebody else's gaze. And I think that's the final frontier. In relationships, women suffer because they feel like, oh, he didn't treat me well, or he didn't respect me. But you are not defined by his respect. You are defined by your respect for yourself. And I think that's a lesson. We have to hold on to that very hard and not get terrorized by that invisible boundary of somebody else's gaze. And when there's enough people talking about sex and enough people talking about life in a different way, that's when the gaze changes, right? So.
I'd also like to add here, if someone's gaze specifically makes you uncomfortable and if someone's behavior is geared towards destabilizing your equilibrium, shut it down. Tell him, I can see what you're doing. I would prefer you not doing this. And then build up a conversation again that's from your side. It's holistic and how you are comfortable with it. When you change the narrative to be your narrative instead of someone else's being thrust upon you, especially in a closed room situation, that's fairly easy to do because you're not dealing with too many variables. You should be able to do that because if you don't shut something down, people take it as acquiescence. You don't want that. If it gets too uncomfortable, confront. Because very honestly, again, consent, right? People think consent only means a lack of no. It is also a yes. That also expands to normal relationships and normal interactions. Your yes has to be a yes, your no has to be a no. Don't brook it.
Questions from this side? This one in this corner.
Yeah, just one question addressed to all the speakers, and I won't hold it against you if you can't answer because you haven't watched it. There is this video doing its rounds, Nanette. Yeah. Anyone with any response from the panel or anybody else?
There's a response coming up here. Can you please repeat the question?
There's a video doing its rounds called Nanette.
A video called Nanette. How many people have seen it? It's on Netflix?
It's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix, yeah.
Okay, you want responses to Nanette? I think Hanif does have a...
To set context, Hannah Gadsby is an Australian comedian. Yeah, not too much. I'm just telling you, yeah. So essentially, she gets on stage and has her bit for about 45 minutes, and you leave with many answers and as many questions once you're done watching it. I think what is specifically special about Nanette is that it flips comedy on its head. That is what makes it so evocative. Because comedy, especially when women do it, is a lot about minimizing yourself and degenerating. Like, you know, you're denigrating yourself again and again. You're making yourself the punchline. You're putting yourself at the focal point of the world impacting you. And lots of women comedians do that, you know. What Hannah does in the net is say, why? Why do we do that? It's not comedy in the slapstick sense. You're not going to be like, lol, every 2 minutes. You are going to pause and say, wow, I didn't think of that.
Please give one example, because it's very tantalizing. And I'm dying to know what it is that she says and asks. And One example, so it's not giving anything away.
God, here's the thing, it's a narrative, so if I give one thing away, a lot of it gets away. But I would really suggest you watch it for the simple fact that it makes you question so much of comedy and how you consume it.
I think maybe also she talks about how comedy is only about 2 acts, right? That you set something up and then you punch it. But there's always another part of the story that you don't get to hear. And I think what she ends up doing through the whole show, and that's why I would agree with Harini that you should watch it, is she actually unpacks the idea of form, which we take for granted, which men have always made, right? So, and I think there are many themes of sexual violence and control of the narrative by male artists, etc., that she unpacks. One of the beautiful things that she says in the end is, you know, that Van Gogh, because people also say, well, if Van Gogh hadn't been insane, he wouldn't have made beautiful paintings, to her at one point. And she said the reason why Van Gogh made beautiful paintings was not because he was insane, but because he had a brother who loved him, who kept making sure that he kept doing something wonderful. So I think it's a very kind of life-affirming narrative, but also very intelligent and sharp one about how art history forms the way that we think about our own lives and the world around us.
Thank you. Any more questions?
There.
What is it? Two at the back there.
So when was asked about how the city shapes or influences...
Sorry, we can't hear you. If you could just speak up a little bit.
Well, when the question was asked about how the city influences your writing, I was struck that all of the answers given were about how you learned to lay claim to the city or felt comfortable in the place, which seems to me, you know, in opposition to the trope that we grew up reading about as being outsider, as being an outsider. And I just wondered if that was particular to the, you know, women experience, is, you know, subverting that trope, or perhaps something you just haven't experienced yet. Because nobody talks about being an outsider, and I just wondered if...
Women as outsiders, or specifically the panelists as outsiders from other cities?
Well, no. How...
Women as outsiders?
Well, yeah. Because the trope is often that you're an outsider to society and outsider to a place.
So my first book was about moving from the outside in. It was about actually this protagonist who's come to Mumbai after many years in the US, and it was about experiencing the city very sharply, as distinct from whatever her life was before, and through the narrative, that experience of Mumbai for the first time weaves in as a storyline, along with the art crime and everything else that happens to her. So it depends. I mean, we are, I think each one of us, I think Paro mentioned how she moved to the city. So there are experiences that we have in the city when we move in, and then there are experiences that we have when we get comfortable with the city. And there are different kinds of experiences, right? We relate to the city, we learn to zone out of things, and we learn to see newer things, right? So it's about discovery, and it's about time gives us the space to discover new things all the time.
But it's also important, right? Sorry. Yeah,
I just wanted to say that historically, if you look at the words used to describe women and men, if you think about it, man about town, think of what images that convey to you. And women of the streets, that's a very completely different image that you get of a woman's transgressive sexuality, out in the open on the streets. And I think that that's important to see. And perhaps that's sort of what you were talking about.
But also that Bombay as a city, not just its narrative, but its experience is of everybody being an outsider, right? It is really a city of migrants in a way that not too many cities are, and of migrants who have come to make it home. Not, for example, say migrants like in Delhi who are transferred there for jobs and may leave it. So there is always a process of coming from outside to in. And maybe that's an interesting reason, now that I think of it, why it is possible for women to join the experience of like not exactly allowed to be in this world, but we are joining with other experiences of being outside, coming in, and that is what makes it a little bit more cosmopolitan than it might be in a more gendered way someplace else.
There's this book in urban policy called, it's a concept more like it, by Jane Jacobs, called The Right to a City. When you come to Bombay, the right to a city is very differently defined than a lot of other cities in India. And that's also what informs the inclusiveness of Bombay, because like Paro said, it's a migrant city. People flit in and out. You come back often, sure, but you move out too. So the right to the city of Bombay is defined so that women are not excluded very often. And that is something I wish we could like make a framework of it and possibly take it to other places, but we can't, because it derives from how Bombay's history was built. So
I also want to know, if isn't it always, we're talking again about women in a certain way, like it's very fashionable now to talk about how women should also, loiter and be outside, etc. But the fact is that women who are making food on the street, who are living on the road, who are prostitutes, have always loitered on the street. So maybe the middle class woman suddenly discovers that she's an interloper on the working class woman's space and thinks about this. I would say we should stop thinking about women en bloc like that, right? Because there are many types of women, and you're going into another woman's space and that woman is coming into your space also. Because if we think of ourselves always as, oh, we're the poor outsiders, then we kind of like cover up our class and caste. And there are some people who are outsiders in our space, and everybody is journeying on a daily basis at multiple levels. So maybe I think it's not such a linear thing as they are saying, right? That there are many like parallel narratives of outside and inside going on.
There was a question at the back there.
All of you represent women in an urban environment where you've been able to feel more liberated and freer to express yourself and have the kinds of experiences which maybe in other parts of the country wouldn't be possible. But do you feel that your writing can also influence, women being able to drive the city more, and also talking about being outsiders? Do you agree that we're still, as women, still quite a bit outsiders in the political process of the country? So to what extent do you think that your kind of writing or in your personal lives, you could advance women's role in driving the city and the country?
It's an interesting question, but it depends on what your actual objective is when you write. Are you there to change society? Or are you there for self-expression? Are you there because you think of yourself as some kind of a messiah to save your own gender or to spread some kind of a strong message? It depends on very individual motivations, I would think. So I can start with Meher or Amrita, whoever wants to take that. Why do you write? Is it to influence people and specifically your own gender? Or do you write for self-expression, for yourself, essentially?
I wouldn't say that I write specifically to liberate my gender from anything at all, but I do like to counter anodyne narratives of Bombay as a particular kind of city, but not really in a gendered way. But I think maybe someone else is more qualified to answer this.
Writers as agents and instruments of change. Do you believe in that to start with?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Actually, you know what? I'm going to let Paro answer this first because she's literally an agent of Ishq. So, you know.
Are you? No, I mean, why do people write? I mean, I write because I really like to write, you know, and then many other things happen. And I think people change the world in so many ways. So I also don't think we need to think of like change as you gave a speech or you wrote something and now policies changed. Sometimes change is that thing. Sometimes it is that, like, look, frankly, I grew up reading Stardust, and then, which was like the only thing I read really, and Enid Blyton. So, and I think I turned out okay, frankly. But I'm saying that being able to read that and think like, oh, there's a whole world of forbidden pleasures that's in like Neeta's Natter. And then to grow up and read Paro Dreams of Passion and say, wow, women go to work and then they have affairs. Oh, this sounds like a world I want to be part of, right? So that also changes us, right? Do I think people change because of what I write? I think they do. Because they love it. And because if you love something, it changes you. And yeah.
Amrita?
I think we all write because we love to write. I think it's a compulsion. Like, you know, it's something that you can't do without. So if I'm not writing books, I'm writing articles. If I'm not writing articles, I'm writing white papers. But I'm always writing in some shape or form. So it's a way of life. Now, what are we trying to influence? And I think you paraphrased it, and like, you know, you started this thread beautifully. That we all write for different reasons, and parts of what we write in a book will be different each time, right? So just like, you know, in the context of like, you know, writing a cybercrime novel, just the stories of how women are treated online and the kinds of challenges that they face, and the kinds of challenges that they face when reporting and trying to lodge an FIR against, like, you know, something like that. I mean, and the discussions that opened up, like, you know, in various forums, and the kinds of, like, you know, like eye-opening, you know, like things that people mentioned, like, you know, like that readers mentioned, that it opened their eyes to newer, to threats that they didn't see coming, is a way of change. It's a tiny change, but it's a way of change, right? So it depends on what is the purpose of your writing and what is it that you're trying to do.
And the last question finally.
My question is a bit personalized. So, since I'm a college student and we are very, at this age we do a lot of stuff. And while talking in the bus, and when the word sex comes, so everybody in the bus just turn back and look at us. So since you are writers and you write a lot of stuff about it, even Farah, have been known to write about this stuff, Hari for that matter. So how does people see you when you come up with this writing? The perception changes, the kind of reaction you get from people. What kind of reaction do you get from people, when they see it? Or things like this in your writing for that?
One of the aims I have in life is to have a parent come up to me and say, my daughter has become a feminist because of you and I hate it. Like, that's something I really, really want at some point in life. But how people approach me, I think they know not to mess with me in many ways, because I will take you down. I have no compunctions about it. Like, I will get down to your level and destroy you. So it's great. Like, if you think I'm a terrible person, good, stay away. It's fine.
I think people do think things about you when you write about sex. I wrote an erotic story in a book once. It had a lot of explicit sex in it, but it also had time travel. And I know that people who read it thought like I have done all the things that were in the story, and maybe I have, but I haven't time traveled. But nobody asked me about the time travel. So it's true. They asked me about the sex stuff, and it was written in the first person. So some of my male friends are like, Paro, you shouldn't have written the first person because I keep thinking about you. And I was like, is that so bad? I don't know, right? But yeah, it's sometimes, and like Meher said earlier, it depends on the mood you're in. Sometimes you get pissed off. Sometimes you find it funny. Anyway, the thing is, how much time can we spend thinking about what other people are thinking, because life is short. So beyond a point, you got to do what you really want to do and, deal with whatever comes your way, I guess. Call it out, like Harneet said, or ignore it some days.
I think I've heard comments of what a colorful life you lead, and it's okay. It's okay. I think it's liberating in a way to write about it, because then you can talk about it.
To end on an amusing note, since we are discussing gender and writing about sex, when I wrote my first novel, there was also the time when Khushwant Singh, who continues to be a legend, was a legend back then, and at all the book readings, that invariably a man who'd get up and ask me, Madam, ये जो आप sex के बारे लिखते हैं, वो सब आपके ही experiences हैं ना? So there was that vicarious need to know. Initially, it used to put me off. Then I started saying, Sir, ये तो कुछ नहीं है, ये तो 10% है. So that sort of, used to sometimes horrify, and most times the person would be embarrassed that he'd even asked that question. But so many years later, 30 years later, I still wait for that question, and believe me, it's still asked. Madam, ये सब आपके बारे ही है? I said, हाँ, ये सब मेरे बारे ही है.
Quality check.
Thank you very much. We're completely out of time. And thank you all for being a fabulous, fabulous audience. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm not here to ask you that question. I'm just here to say thank you very much for a very exciting panel. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Shobha. This is, probably the 20th edition of our series, and it's for conversations like this makes it very special. We have 2 more coming up in August. We have one on wildlife and the city, and the other one is on the architectural legacy of the British Raj. So it spans the gamut. We have to do our token thank yous, but thank you very much to the NGMA, Shruti is here, Mr. Kenid, to Karak Collective. You all may have seen that wonderful pop-up outside. I do hope it's there, and for you who haven't seen it, get a chance to actually experience it. We have wonderful programs lined up. We're in the middle of our opera season, so if people haven't been to the Opera House and experienced the season, I suggest you do so. We have a couple of programs in August. And stay tuned. Come back again. Follow us on social media. And thank you and have a wonderful evening.